see if we got, okay, all right. Thank you, Anthony, and thank you, Joe, and thank you so much for the presentation on behalf of the city, Honor, for really talking about what's very important to all of us as we move forward and design urban spaces and urban projects for our great cities. I did a couple of things for this presentation. I brought 3 mega projects, 3 large planning projects, all of which are under construction. And before I get into them, I'd like to start with this project, which some of you may or may not remember, from 2008. So I can't go back 50 years, but I can go back at least to the beginning of the firm in 2006, where we did a study on the central core of Chicago and did an analysis on what it would take to meet the 2030 carbon challenges. So if we talk about sustainability and energy back then, what we defined sustainability as was in a couple of different ways. One certainly was energy, and to pursue that from a carbon standpoint. But the other was cultural, economic sustainability, political sustainability, and a quality of life that we hoped would include great things, as Eleanor has mentioned, like great schools, great public spaces, and a public realm that was valuable. I won't go into the detail of this back then, but we published a book in 2009, 2011, that basically unpacked the city and put it back together in hopefully a more unified manner, and ran an analysis on a parametric model way back then that talked about different scenarios that could lead to a kind of balanced equation of how to build in a dense urban context. This information was extremely valuable to us. We took this information and we took this approach of looking at systems, not just in a cold analytical way, but hopefully in a useful way to pursue most of the master plans or all of the master plans and projects that we've done around the world in the last 13 years. So that took us about a year or two when we looked at uses and programs and other kinds of information that we found. And what we came to the conclusion was, in a nutshell, was the importance of a balanced approach to urban design, where it wasn't just all about, as I would joke about back then, if you're on a diet, eating peas or just eating carrots. It's really about a balanced equation of design. One of the most significant factors was the existing building stock and the ability to recognize that 99% of our cities are existing building stock. So when we hear Eleanor talking about the west side and the south side and looking at the churches and looking at the schools, that building stock is extremely valuable. And I love the word leverage because way back then, 10 years ago, that was the statement we made in the book. And the statement was to leverage the latent potential of the existing building stock to reposition buildings as valuable economic assets. What we have done since then is taken that idea, and if you think about cities as ecosystems or environmental approaches where we are the inhabitants in those ecosystems that we've built for ourselves, we talk about leveraging not just building stock, but public realm, infrastructure, all things that go into making buildings. So when we were asked to come to China and look at 7 square kilometers of space, and we decide that we only want to use one of the 7, can we leverage the open space criteria for the density that then can help support all of those who occupy those 7 kilometers to stay in an urban setting or in a city setting to live in a kind of a reasonable and balanced equation. Understanding that all systems, water, waste, all of it is part of that equation, and none of them can be ignored. What we find is when we reach to one extreme or the other, regardless of what that might be from a design standpoint, something gives, something fails, something drops off the charts. And so we always look at all things all the time. I know that might sound a little ridiculous, but it's true. Regardless of what we're asked to do, we look at the environmental systems, we look at the economic systems, and I'll show you one of the projects that we're working on right now where that became most evident in terms of leveraging infrastructure for sustainability. One story back then was the idea of introducing affordable housing for what you might think is strange, but middle to low-income professionals in China in second-tier cities. One child at the time, not anymore, but one child, two sets of parents, not able to sustain that family unit in the first-tier cities, really a burden on the family structure and the culture of families in China. And what we decided to do was to design a modular, expandable program for housing in Chengdu that afforded that system to stay intact. That is, grandparents, parents, grandchildren. That kind of relationship was key to the success of this project, and this project is now under construction in Tianfu. About 100,000 people as part of the city, integrated into the city. In Kazakhstan, even though we were asked to come and design a World Expo, we wondered what kind of place we would leave behind. And so the legacy concepts of all our work is very important to us. Not necessarily what we're doing today and the fancy, nice, new, shiny buildings that we might get to deliver in the next 2 or 3 years, but 50 years from now, when we're not around, what did we do? What was the knock-on effect of our actions today? And so we really looked at a legacy plan for this. You see the little circle in the bottom, the big circle in the bottom right-hand corner. That's what we were asked to look at, just that. And we said, what's the rest of the space? And they said, parking. I'm like, nice. This is integrated into the city. The axis that you see going up the screen is a direct link, a linear park to downtown. The university is on the left-hand side of that screen. The hospital is on the bottom of that screen, housing to the right. And we said, what are you doing with this 1.4 by 1.4 kilometer site? They said, well, we'll figure that out at some point. So we master planned it as part of the competition entry, and we were lucky enough to win. What we did was we designed all the housing, all the guidelines for the sustainable infrastructure, all of the transportation, all of the public spaces and parks, and we sat on the side of the client. We moved from being the consultant to being the advisor on the client side to help them understand how they could integrate this as part of the project, and we did all of the sustainable carbon testing along with it. I can tell you that all of it got built. The reason that's important is because it is now a vibrant legacy planned community. All of the buildings that you see in the project, there were 28 of them, were designed ahead, forward, for adaptive reuse. And I can tell you with my hand on my heart that over the last year, they've gone in and renovated all of them and moved international businesses and banks into these expo sites. They saved hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in this exercise, and got a more sustainable concept from it, and a city where people could live, play, work, walk to school. I remember us talking about daycares, little things like barbers, dentists, all the things that go into making these projects great. So these are the things that you might see in brochures and publications, but what you don't see behind it is all the work that goes into making these communities great, and that's really what we wanted to talk about today. The legacy planning. In Dubai, when we were asked to come to do 2020, same thing. We took a long time, 4 months in an advisory role, to look at how we could make this much more efficient from a sustainable standpoint. Mixed use, I'd love to hear Joe talk about mixed use all the time and all the lists of things that were identified to make cities great. Couldn't agree with you more. And when we look at these kind of mega projects that are catalysts, and remember, we live in one where we had expositions as part of our city, and what that means to public open space and the identity of a city or a district for people. These are the kind of lifestyle questions that we ask. We went back, because we always go back to what we've learned from other examples, to talk about walkability and sustainability and density, and live-work connectivity, which we all use that phrase, but what does it really mean when we design spaces to walk? And what are we doing in terms of resilience as we look forward? If we're really looking back and looking forward 50 years, I can tell you that our firm is on the far left-hand side of 2006. 2007, I think, is when the iPhone was released. Those kinds of technologies that you see listed on the top of that chart, not all of them have been invented since we started our firm. The projects take years. Some of our projects are just now being finished. 5, 10-year plans. Look at the transformation of technology that has occurred. It's incredible. And so as we look forward, what we do is we work outside of our realm of architectural practice to work with people like these inventors and visionaries who talk about where they think technology is going, where they think cities are going, and we design for them. What we're basically suggesting is don't leave anything behind. This integration of technology and environmental concerns is very important to us. We don't believe you will live without either. We don't believe you'll live without great parks, and we don't think you're going to throw away your iPhone anytime too soon. All of these things we have dug into in order to identify lifestyle. We created a mixed-use project here, and at the center of it is a park. That park is a defined public space, specifically leveraged, I would say, as accessible by all. And in the Middle East, especially in Dubai, that's kind of special, we think, where it's not a resilient component, it is the identifiable component. All of the neighborhoods, the means of moving around in shade and shadow, and it's not just us, there are hundreds of architects involved. I want you to make sure. We were responsible for the legacy plan, and we were responsible for the central project, but there are hundreds of architects on this project. So some of the things that you see here are by us, some are by others, but the character and scale, the means of living in these types of arts environments were critical. Water, extremely critical. The performance of the buildings are directly related to the performance of the city. And that's something that I find to be sometimes abandoned. We're working in the Caribbean, we're working in Africa now, and when we we just came back from Jamaica on Thursday, when we speak about developing centers or the city or the existing cities, we find that it's divorced, that the planning is divorced from the architectural design. And we think that's a flaw. We heard Owen talk about leveraging buildings over in one area for projects in the other area. And what we're suggesting is that we leverage program, we hybridize program, we leverage everything for everyone all the time. In Jamaica, when we talked about, do you talk about goals and targets for your buildings that can help you build less infrastructure or more efficient infrastructure, it was a new conversation. These kinds of things are critical. And as we come full circle to come back home to Chicago, and we talk about the manner in which we might be growing or expanding, and I learned a lot today, to be honest, which was great to see the presentation. How do we do that? What is actually an intelligent way to do that? Because in the end of the day, it is really one great city. And that's important to us. Doesn't matter if it's a super tall or if it's a house. Some of the things that we play with that we've introduced about a decade ago and still push in places like Toronto, for example, where I grew up, are carbon-based densities. We're going to release a book this year on our studies that we've done over the last 5 years. It relates to carbon footprint and typologies. Transformation of use, blended systems and hybrid programming for existing buildings, where you can introduce high-tech systems into 1850 buildings and create heat and energy and leverage that building for tech companies. Infrastructure that relates to fiber. What does that mean to an environment for a park? Because this project actually has a great park beside it. Leveraging buildings to make infrastructure valuable and not just a burden to a city, to transform that relationship between heat and energy so that buildings and infrastructure are really one concept of system, which is why we talked about blended systems, and really transforming or injecting programs like cultural programs, educational programs. In 2007, we introduced a theater project into our project in Dubai. They said, no, we just want retail. And what are they doing today? They're putting theater projects into their program. These things are important for the balance. And I don't want you to think that we're just boring guys that run analysis all day long in order to design our buildings. We do have a lot of fun with it, and we do enjoy what we do, and we think about life, and we think about the pleasures of our cities and the fantastic, amazing environments that we can create for all of us to learn from and enjoy. And so for us, this is an ongoing passion of what we do. And I think it's great to see Joe and Eleanor talk about and kick off 50/50 with this kind of vision for our city and a vision for our future. And for us, there's nothing better than a great plan. Thanks.